Hi, and welcome to Animalia the Podcast. I'm Natasha, and thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to check out the website animaliathepod.weebly.com for archived episodes. Search Animalia the Pod on your favorite podcast platform or SoundCloud or YouTube every Friday fortnight for a new episode. You should also like and follow the Facebook and Instagram pages. And if you'd like to appear on the podcast, please send me an email at animaliathepod@gmail.com. This week on Animalia, after a week's hiatus due to a death in the family, which I'll talk about later, I'm sharing an interview that's part of an online course put on by Animal Justice. It's a non-profit organization based in Canada. The Animal Justice Academy, as it's called, is a comprehensive 6-week course facilitated by activists, educators, lawyers, and other professionals, and features hours upon hours of information about a range of animal welfare issues. So much content that I am behind. Still combing through week 2 material when week 3 is in fact just wrapping up. I was so moved by what I've seen and read so far on the course that I decided to incorporate some of it into this week's podcast. You're about to hear excerpts of a conversation between Camille Lubchuk, the Executive Director of Animal Justice, and Dr. Mark Beckhoff, a biologist and animal behavior expert. They are talking about animal sentience, a phrase you may have heard before, which basically means that animals, like humans, have the power of perception by the senses. First, there's a general discussion, then a clip about educating and convincing people, and finally, a word for all you animal activists out there. I hope you find this as fascinating as I did.
And it's clear that it's implicit in any kind of animal welfare legislation, no matter how lame it is, that if they really didn't think that these non-human animals, food animals, weren't smart and emotional, then anything goes. And for a lot of people, it would be anything goes, because a lot of people think that the regulations and the laws are just, an impediment to making more Babe lettuce and tomato sandwiches or more cow burgers or something like that. But there really are dumb people out there. And it's just something I feel I have to say. And they're dumb in a very self-serving way. So they either ignore what we know or they just don't know what we know. But they do go home, a lot of them, not all of them, because dog abuse and the abuse of companion animals is fairly rampant, and people are surprised by that, and then treat their companion animal as if they're, just love muffins and have this whole spectrum of feelings. So I think to me, it always boils down to the economics of it. I really do.
Right. And the fact that there is perhaps some motivated reasoning going on, and if somebody's profiting from confining chickens, exploiting pigs, killing cows, they're much less susceptible to actually reading and accepting the science that is pretty clearly settled at this point. And I take your point about sentience being pretty clearly enshrined in legislation, whether it's explicit or not. Some places have made it explicit and say, in Quebec, for instance, Quebec says animals are not just property, they're also sentient beings. Lots of countries have done that. That's not even particularly novel anymore. But even when they haven't made that very, very obvious in the legislation, the fact that there's cruelty laws at all, why would they exist if animals couldn't feel pain, right?
Yep. Some people will say they exist because they're doing it, sort of gratuitously, that, people think this, so we'll do it. And, in Canada, the United States, throughout the world, some of the cruelty laws are really lame. They really don't protect animals against a lot of heinous abuse. Like in the United States, the Federal Animal Welfare Act was rewritten to exclude laboratory rats, mice, birds, fishes, and other animals as being animals. And there's a clause in the United States Animal Welfare Act that says we are redefining animals to exclude these certain fully sentient beings.
Yeah, it's quite incredible, really, because it omits most of the animals used in research and testing. even, slaughter provisions, from my understanding in the States, omit chickens, which are most of the animals who are slaughtered in the States as well. So there's often trickery that can go on there when the government decides who gets to count for the purposes of the word animal.
Exactly. And once again, people also, true animal welfare really is responsible for the abuse and horrific abuse of trillions of animals when you throw fishes into the equation. Because true animal welfare basically says that if we're trying to do all we can to reduce or eliminate, pain, harm, suffering, and death. And if we're doing all we can and those events happen to happen, then it's okay because we're doing our best to reduce it. And that's why Jessica Pierce and I, in our book, The Animal's Agenda, basically wrote animal welfare off and substituted it with what we call the science of animal well-being, where the life of every single individual matters because they're alive, not because of what they can do with us or do for us. And sentience plays a role there. The old Jeremy Bentham quote about it's not whether they can talk or think, it's can they suffer. So if you adhere to some of the guidelines for the science of animal well-being and every individual matters, then you can't begin to justify the use of techniques that cause any harm at all. And people go, oh, that's really radical. I think that the killers and the abusers should be looked at as the radicals, not the people who want to protect the non-humans.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And going back to a comment you made a minute ago about whether they can think or reason. I mean, I've always found that so human supremacist as well, because it's setting up humans as the metric by which we should judge all other animals. And really whether they're worthy of our consideration depends on whether they have qualities that are most like us, which has always just struck me as completely the wrong way to go about it. I mean, obviously we're a species that considers ourselves the dominant species. Who knows how much longer that will last with climate change. But, can you talk a little bit about some of the abilities that animals have that humans just never will and why that matters?
Well, yeah. I mean, you've got like ultrasound and infrasound, sounds at a really high pitch that bats and various cetaceans use, and the really low frequency sounds that some ground dwelling or subterranean rodents use, for example. We don't really use UV light. We don't fly. I mean, some people do, but not in the way of flying like, from one house to another in the air. We really don't have the, say, sensory capacities that a lot of animals have. And so we could set ourselves up as a template against which all other animals are compared, but it's really bad biology, in the end. I mean, it's really ignores evolutionary continuity. It really ignores basic evolutionary principles. But it's convenient to do that because the minute we place ourselves at the top of some kind of hierarchy or pyramid, higher means more valued, more important. Lower means less valued, less important. And that opens up the door for all sorts of human exceptionalism and abuse.
Right. And that makes me think of those images you sometimes see online where there's a pyramid with humans at the top and it says ego underneath. And then there's a circle with all the species on the planet sort of interacting with each other. And it's the difference between an ecosystem and an ecosystem. And
yes.
Your comments really bring that to mind.
Yeah, we're good about putting ourselves on the top of these pyramids so that not only are we, quote, above the other animals, but we're separate from them. So
yeah, we don't even consider ourselves animals most of the time. I think if you point out to a lot of people that humans are animals, they're kind of like, well, no, we're different.
Yeah, we're different, but some people might be plants, but we're certainly not, and we're not microbes. But you're right, and that's why when I write, some editors get upset with it, but I really insist on two things. I will say non-human animals, and then in parens I'll put the word animals just so it doesn't get burdensome when you're right. And the other is that animals are who, not what. It's a matter of who we eat, not what we eat, or who we are abusing. And once again, that just comes back to them not being objects or property like they are under the law. It comes back to them as being subjects of a life. And that opens a door for a lot of conversations.
Yeah, no, it's all about planting seeds. And the more seeds that are planted, the better chance that some of them are going to eventually grow, right? That's kind of all we can hope to do.
No, absolutely. That's what I mean. I always like that analogy too, that it is planting seeds. I mean, my attitude is you be nice to the people with whom you disagree, put it out there and move on. And if people want to get into these silly arguments about we don't know this or, oh, you're just a radical, my preference is to move on and work with people who are willing, are willing to learn from me, and I'm willing to learn from them.
I think that's the right approach. And you've certainly done a lot more to educate people about the amazing cognitive and especially emotional capacities that animals have, given how prolific an author you are and how much your work is spread out there. And it's something that was hugely influential to me as I started thinking about becoming an animal rights lawyer and doing this work. So I appreciate that. But I'm wondering if you feel like the work that you do directed at children offers more promise than directed at adults. Do you feel like there's a greater payoff there speaking with younger minds who haven't been completely indoctrinated by a society that views animals as body parts instead of individuals?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I love working with kids. First of all, they ask really wickedly difficult questions. Whenever I hear somebody say, oh, this is a stupid question, but I kind of brace myself because there's no such thing as stupid questions. But they're also much more open about it. They're open about what they know and what they don't know. And so many kids, and I don't want to say especially kids who are living with a companion animal, but sometimes that seems to be the case, just say, well, how could they say that? My dog is a mammal. My dog feels. They grieve, they feel joy, they love to play, they fall in love, they get jealous, they get embarrassed, they enjoy certain activities, they run away from certain situations because obviously they're fearful. And when a kid who's 6 or 7 years old learns that cows and pigs and other food animals, I hate the phrase, but I always say so-called food animals are mammals with the same brains and the same neurochemistry and neuroanatomy, it really bums them out. It makes them sad. And they're the future. Depending on the word you use, I sometimes say, but I wouldn't say it to them, is, their minds haven't been contaminated by falsehoods about who animals are.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been socialized to believe a certain thing about animals, which is that some are worthy of our love, some are meant for our use, and some are pests to be destroyed and done away with. And no, I think you're totally right. You ask any small child if an animal, if their pet, cat or dog can feel and think, and of course they know the answer to that question. And it's so often, the parents that are put in the position of trying to justify why their family eats certain animals and loves certain other animals. And it can be a pretty difficult situation that prompts that cognitive dissonance for the parents. So I admire all those little kids, and especially the ones who end up pushing their parents to maybe go vegetarian or vegan and become more interested in animal rights.
They do. And among some of my friends, there's definitely been changes brought about in their meal plans by the kids in their home. I mean, I have two good examples of people who now have something like maybe Meatless Monday and Meatless Friday, some who will, indulge in certain meaty meals, if you will, maybe once or twice a week, not 10 times a week. And that's wonderful. Every now and again, some people will say, well, that's not enough, that overnight they should be going vegan or vegetarian. And I'm thinking, yeah, that would be nice, but number one, it probably won't last. And number two, give them credit for what they're doing. I mean, my goodness, just stop being negative. I always just say work for the animals, not against people. Just work for what's in your heart and not work against people. If you will, attack the position, not the person.
I think that's right. And we've got to remember as we do activism work and spreading compassion to have compassion for humans. And humans have been socialized over decades of their lives to believe a certain thing. And it's not such an easy matter to give up on that belief. And it's even more of a difficult matter to change one's behaviors, even if that belief changes. Old habits die hard, as they say. Animal cruelty flourishes in secrecy, and it doesn't do so well when people like you and others shine light on what happens and really educate people about what's going on. I think one of the best things that ever happened in Canada, for instance, a few years ago, one of the best things that ever happened to the animal rights movement was when Anita Krines, a woman, was charged with giving water to pigs, charged with criminal mischief for showing an act of compassion by giving water to pigs who were suffering on a hot day. And the reason for that is because it really shone a light on that industry and spotlighted things that they wanted to hide. So I think you're right about that.
Yeah, I like to say, borrowing from Gretchen Weiler, who was a wonderful activist, that cruelty can't stand the spotlight. And and I add to that, sometimes don't expect a gold star on your head at the end of the night when you've written or said something. You just got to be focused, be nice to people, and just keep putting the message out, as you said. And people will either pick up on it or they won't. But I also say, don't like to get involved in these pissing matches with people who just want to deflect attention away from the real issues at hand and want to just waste your time, energy, and possibly money.
We have a long way to go in Trinidad and Tobago, but I relish the deep thought and consideration that is behind the work of all these animal justice warriors. Be sure to check out Animal Justice on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I think you can still sign up for the course on animaljusticeacademy.com. If you can spare the time, please do. You will not regret it. My commentary this week is about the loss that I mentioned earlier. The reason why I started this podcast has come full circle yet again. Since this is the only forum I have to channel my grief and pain, I hope you bear with me for a few minutes and let me get this off my chest. The 4th of February was an ordinary day that turned into a nightmare for me and my husband. As I was sitting at the dining room table working on my laptop, one of my 8-month-old kittens, Pierre, came bounding in with a lizard in his mouth. Not unusual for him or for any of the other cats in the household. What was unusual was me chasing him outside with it, as I had recently begun doing, as their prey was littering our floor and becoming a nuisance. A few minutes later, Pierre came back inside, walking unsteadily and frothing at the mouth. By the time I noticed something was wrong, he had dashed back outside, not giving me a chance to pick him up and investigate further. I immediately called my vet to ask what I should do, given the signs I observed, and I was told to flush his mouth with water and try to make him vomit. Pierre, however, had, during that brief conversation, disappeared into the bushes next door. And by the time I went across there to look for him, I found him lifeless, barely breathing. So I carried him back to my house, tried to flush out his mouth, while my husband prepared the carrier and told me to get him to the vet. So I put on my clothes and I jumped in the car, sped out of the gate with him next to me on the passenger seat, my eyes full of tears, begging him to hold on. I noticed he stopped breathing about 5 minutes into my journey. In the end, I still don't know for sure what poisoned him because there was no toxicology test done, but I have a strong suspicion that it was that very lizard that he caught. It was one of those that you rarely see, a small dark brown with a distinctive green and white stripe down its back. It makes very quick darting movements, and I think that is what would have attracted my avid hunter Pierre, who could not see anything move without investigating it. I am still grieving over this loss as I grieved for Toro, who was killed by straying dogs, wondering what else could I have done to save him. cringing at the painful death he would have experienced had I acted earlier, if I had taken the lizard away from him, if I had driven faster. I even shed some blood during this incident as I tried to stick my finger down his throat to get more water in, and he bit me, involuntarily of course. And I cannot close my eyes without the sight of him lying there, dying in front of my eyes. It is a pain that I would not wish on my worst enemy. I won't say anything else for now, but to advise and to plead with pet parents to cherish every single moment you have with your babies, because you never know when they will be taken away. So that's episode 18 of Animalia. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a bit more about what sentience means and how you, as an activist, volunteer, or pet parent, can make a better world for all animals. Special thanks to Animal Justice for their amazing Academy material, and of course to Northwest Vet Clinic for being there in my time of need. Join us again in 2 weeks for another interview with an amazing person advocating on behalf of animals. I'm Natasha, and I'm leaving you with this song, as it is Carnival weekend here in Trinidad and Tobago, although there's no carnival, and in loving memory of Pierre, in the hope that things will indeed get better, even though we miss him so much. So until next time, take good care, and remember, love off your pets. Bye-bye.
Change your ways. Don't let this moment pass you by and remain the same. Hey, what we gonna do now? There's no panorama. Hey, we can jump off and play mass in the savannah. Just be patient, hold it straight. Enjoy life and don't complain. You got to pray like every day, and things will be irate. And things will be irate. Gonna be irate, hey. Patrice again, yeah. And again, things gonna get better. Wouldn't last forever, no. Things gonna get better. Hitting go last, hitting go last, hitting go last, hitting go last.